Being a content creator on the internet is a double-edged sword. On one hand, you can reach the heights of fame that was once only reserved for TV personalities and Hollywood actors. But on the flip side, a few wrong moves can ruin everything you've built and cause the fans you worked so hard to get to turn on you, making you wish you never hit record. Call them what you want. Lolcows, has-beens, whatever suits your preference, but all these creators share one thing in common. That is that they used to be loved by their fans in their own way, and now they're absolutely hated by those same fans. And no one understands this more than our first subject, iDubbbz, who was once one of the internet's most beloved creators. Because you see, prior to the internet spit roasting him and making fun of him to the point of where he looked like a tomato, iDubbbz was everyone's favorite creator. In an age of edgy satirical content, iDubbbz stood atop of YouTube. And while yes, he had great success by himself, he had partners in crime with Filthy Frank and Max Mofo. This trio together and separately made videos that still get talked about to this day, as if they're folktales being passed down from one chronically online generation to the next.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
And it's easy to see why. They were shocking, funny, and were doing things that we haven't seen before or since. They were the mid-2010s era of YouTube in a nutshell, and for Ian individually, he built up a large reputation up with classic series like Bad Unboxing, Kickstarter Crap, and his magnum opus, Content Cop.
What we do here is go back.
A unique style of commentary that had blistering critiques of the subject with hilarious moments and skits that added to the overall value of the videos.
It's gorgeous.
And with them, Ian could do no wrong. Even when the videos took it a step too far at times, this had an effect on the person watching it to where it made the audience believe that everything Ian said was right. And it didn't help that often the subjects of these videos were already disliked members of the YouTube community to begin with. So in a way, most people didn't think much of it. To his audience, the creators in it deserved it, so what was the problem? Well, it brings us to today where Ian is seen in a completely different lens, and Ian himself would go on to disavow the very content that catapults him to the top of YouTube. But how could this happen? What happened to make iDubbbz go from loved to hated in such a short time frame? We can start with his relationship, which has been under a lot of contention for a while, as Ian's wife Anissa Joma has made many of his former fans leave in droves, as it just boils down to her just being unlikable to many of iDubbbz's fans. To go along with this, she seems to be very controlling of every facet of Ian's life, making many wonder who is calling the shots in Ian's corner. Speaking of his corner, inside of it, it's surely better, right? Wrong. iDubbbz is one of the many content creators that take part in the influencer boxing scene. Yeah, a great crowd to be associated with. But the beginning and the end for Ian was the whole situation involving Froggy Fresh, where after a successful event at Creator Clash 1, Ian went ahead and created its sequel in Creator Clash 2. And no, unfortunately, this is not a situation where the sequel is better, as in leading up to the event, one of the expected fighters, Froggy Fresh, was kicked off the fighter roster. After weeks of speculation, overall fogginess, and what seemed like an apparent cover-up, the truth finally came out when iDubbbz addressed the drama, where it was found out that Froggy was kicked due to training with Sam Hyde, only to contradict himself in the very same video.
Is kicking Froggy Fresh from the Creator Clash card. The main reason Froggy was kicked from the card was for collaborating with Sam Hyde. And, you know, for anyone who's been following the story, that's, you know, fairly obvious.
A few moments later.
I got to the point where I was like, okay, I don't want you working or training with Sam Hyde, but you're doing that, so all right, I'll look past it. I don't want you making content with Sam Hyde, but it seems like that's a real deal breaker for you, so I guess I'll look past it.
Who Ian has had a vocal disliking of since Creator Clash 1. This revelation had a domino effect, which not only affected the event, but Ian himself, as he released his infamous I Miss the Old iDubbbz, a video fully disavowing his old actions and content, and drawing a clear line in the sand. I'm changing. You can come along for the ride, or get left behind. This, in combination of other clips showing Ian openly mocking his former fans, is what put the nail in the coffin for Ian's legacy. The Ian that they loved and knew is dead and gone, and any chance of him coming back is fruitless. And while we'll have to wait and see how this affects Ian in the long run, it's plausible to say that he's damaged his image substantially, and only time will tell if these factors will outright ruin iDubbbz. But in the complete opposite way, Wings of Redemption is a person who from day one has been laughed at and hated. This perception would go on to haunt him for the rest of his career. But before I continue, I should let someone with a little bit more expertise handle this one. So I'm calling upon expert on all things Wings of Redemption, FXK Nate, to handle this. Take it away, Nate.
We all have those moments. You sift your way through the garbage in your room and you make your way to the mirror and you look at yourself and you think, God, I am fucking disgusting. I am fat, ugly, useless, lacking in talent, lacking in hygiene, lacking in testosterone, balding, living in a shithole, eating disgusting fucking slop to keep myself alive. But these are just intrusive thoughts. They never accurately reflect reality. But imagine if those intrusive thoughts were reality. That's what it's like to be Wings of Redemption. Jordy McCratty Jordan, or his legal name, Richard Samuel, is a finger-sniffing chili can consumer and reformed vacuum part salesman, and was born on April 21st, 1986, making him 37 years old, which is really fucking old. When Richard isn't drinking Pepsi or killing cats or rummaging through dumpsters to find vacuum parts, you'll often find him streaming 3 times a day for 30-minute intervals on his YouTube channel. Wings, who I'll be referring to by his Christian name, Richard, got his start on the day of our Lord and Savior, January 27th, 2008. Now, despite the fact that Richard's channel is currently completely wiped of all videos, he was actually a pioneer of the gameplay and commentary genre. In fact, he was one of the most well-respected Call of Duty creators. He was even one of the first video game YouTubers to actually get a capture card, something that back then was kind of rare, but now is an industry standard. And Wings was really respected because he would give lots of tips on how to play the game, as well as telling stories from his life and being very candid and open with his feelings. And Wings would find massive success as he was one of the best in his field. Eventually down the line, Wings would also get in early on the podcasting craze. He would start his podcast, Painkiller Already, with fellow YouTuber Woody's Gamertag, as well as FPS Kyle, better known as FPS Russia. Richard, for lack of a better term, would often say really fucking stupid things during these podcasts. Some notable things he did were make comments on the age of consent.
Because a 16-year-old can make her own damn decisions. I'd cut child off around 12.
And he also lied about being shot. For like no reason. He would also detail stories about how he would accidentally kill a cat when he was a very young child, and he even told the story of the time that his grandmother shoved her fingers up his disgusting crap-covered crusty crud cutter.
I had my grandma give me a saline enema. I get on the toilet and a saline enema like stimulates the muscles to actually make it come out, so I do it, it goes and then that little piece, probably about this big, hits it and turns like that, and it spreads my butthole wide open. I'm like, you might have to take me to the hospital. But what we ended up doing is she ended up sticking her finger up my button and mashing the turd up.
But despite Richard being a literal brainlet, the listeners of PKA podcast would find Richard endearing, and he would fill his role quite well as the insane redneck of the podcast, as opposed to Woody, who was more of the straight man, and Kyle, who was more of a wild card. Richard would even be one of the first content creators to beef with Keemstar, something that once again became an industry standard years later. However, the beginning of the end for Wings would begin during Painkiller Already episode 67. The infamous match between him and fellow Call of Duty YouTuber Pro Syndicate would take place. Pro Syndicate had already carved out a niche as one of the best Call of Duty Zombies players. In fact, he was one of my favorite growing up. But Richard felt as though that his impressive accolades weren't much to sneeze at, and he would make it clear that PvP Call of Duty was much more difficult than Zombies. And so a challenge would be proposed between the two players, and they would load up a match of Call of Duty 4. This match went very poorly for Wings, where he would end up losing, which resulted in him breaking his controller and calling Woody a homophobic slur.
I broke my controller.
You broke your controller?
Yeah, keep fucking laughing, you fucking faggot.
Oh, Wings,
And moving forward, Wings' role on YouTube would begin to change. In over a very short amount of time, he would go from one of the best and most well-respected Call of Duty YouTubers to one of the easiest lol cows to farm, such as the time that he threatened to unalive himself, as well as threatening that he would take a fellow content creator, El Presador, with him. However, the point of no return would come in 2014 when the PKA boys would plan a survival camping trip, where they would bring only the bare necessities for survival. A truly genius idea for content. Wings, of course, would agree, only to back out when he discovered his 64-ounce thermos of Wendy's chili was arbitrarily decided to be non-essential, and they would only find out that he wasn't coming after they began to travel. This would be the last straw for the PKA boys. Wings' self-destructive behavior, selfish attitude, as well as his inability to make positive improvements in his life would become much of a burden on Woody and Kyle, and he would be removed from PKA. Wings would begin to fall into irrelevance. Up until this point, there was some hope that Wings could change, but at this point, it was all gone. Wings would begin focusing on streaming for the next few years, where he would find very little success. Most of Wings' highlights and clips would only draw more negative attention to him. as they were rarely flattering and displayed his volatile and aggressive behavior towards teammates, enemies, and even his own viewers. And with each outburst, Wings would become more and more sought out by trolls and miscreants alike. And ironically, these trolls were the only thing that made Wings' content interesting, mainly because his gameplay skills were mediocre and his commentary skills were mundane at best. And with this, troll channels would begin to pop up like Lummox, Wings007, and Sean Ranklin. And these channels, ironically, would get more traction than Richard. In fact, many people just get their Richard content from these troll accounts. But you see, these channels would do a lot more than just document Wings' current antics. They would even go back and resurface old clips of him. And many of these things they would never let Richard live down, like his story about killing a cat or his comments on the age of consent. And the trolling would start to evolve from playful to malicious. The trolls would then begin to interfere with his personal life, sending DoorDash orders and police to his double-wide trailer. In fact, they would even get him banned from DoorDash. In fact, the trolls would go so far that they would actually submit pictures to a news station saying that he was killed in a drone strike. But you see, it was more than just hating Wings. There was a certain joy that came with hating him, because it was fun to watch him squirm, to watch him melt down, and to observe the loop and repeat the same habits over and over again. His anger issues, his issues with eating, the issues with his marriage. And as a result, Wings has enabled a culture around himself that promotes nothing but negativity. Wings of Redemption has been in the public eye a lot more lately because he recently boxed fellow lolcow Boogie2988. And after his victory against Boogie, it seemed like the narrative had changed on him a little bit. But the narrative isn't the only thing that needs to change. Richard needs to change as well. And we've already begun to see signs of Richard's negative traits coming back. And it's only a matter of time to see if Richard truly changes.
Thanks, Nate. You can thank him too by going to his channel and checking out some of his stuff. He makes quality content, and that'd be the biggest thank you from me to him if you went over there and checked his stuff out. Thanks again, Nate, for your part in this video, and let's continue. But for our next creator, I want to start by asking a question. What lengths should a creator go to keep up their image? The reason I ask this is because Boogie2988 is someone who's willing to put his whole career on the line just to keep up his reputation. But unfortunately for him, he shares both shades of iDubbbz and Wings, in more ways than just one. As once upon a time, Boogie was a beloved creator, mostly known from his character he played, Francis, a Mountain Dew obsessed gamer who would explode into a rage if anyone touched his precious green liquid.
Did you drink my Mountain Dew? Let me smell your breath.
With these Francis videos being some of the most watched videos on his channel to this day, the popularity of these Francis videos not only grew Boogie's channel exponentially, but allowed him to post more videos where it was just himself not playing a character. And with more eyes on his normal non-character playing self is where the problems came. Because while for a decent amount of time Boogie was seen as the person who could do no wrong, he was YouTube's Mr. Rogers. But as time went on, fans began to notice that on every controversial topic Boogie would talk about, he would never pick a side. He was a fence sitter, and this fence sitter mentality was starting to bother his fans as they felt Boogie was trying to play both sides to keep up his wholesome creator image. This began to put cracks in Boogie's image, and would lead us directly to VidCon 2017. Or the event that would ruin Boogie's career, where Boogie was invited to a panel about cyberbullying. Boogie, being no stranger to the plight of online harassment, of course accepted it, and would be joined by others. Most importantly, controversial feminist creator Anita Sarkeesian, who at the time was making waves on the internet. This notoriety would have her in the crosshairs of many, and on this day it all came to a head as the panel was crashed by skeptic content creator Sargon of Akkad, and others who extremely disliked Anita, causing the panel to become a pissing match between two completely different ideologies. The tension in the air was so thick that after the panel had basically wrapped up and Boogie gave his closing statements, Anita took him backstage and berated him, saying that he gave her no chance to respond to his closing statement. And after finding out about the situation, many began to go after Anita. But in an attempt to quell the drama, Boogie made a response to the situation where he basically said while Anita's actions made him distraught, they came from a good place. And after the aggressive encounter, they had a talk that cleared the air afterwards. This attempt to play both sides of the conflict seemed good to Boogie at first, but would go on to bite him in the ass, as this was the first time his audience would begin to take notice what Boogie would do to not rock the boat. Even after being humiliated and put in a place where he himself said caused him to disassociate, he still tried to go up to bat for Anita. But this incident, while embarrassing, seemed insignificant in the grand scheme of things, and at the time, Boogie was still YouTube's Mr. Rogers, right? Well, unfortunately, this event would have more an effect on his channel than anyone could have ever imagined, as his fans began to wonder what lengths Boogie would go to keep up a wholesome creator image. But to many, this blatant display would cause Boogie to begin to bleed subscribers, an early showing of what was in store for his channel further down the line. as he would continue to tear down his reputation with more unbearable fence-sitting behavior. This, in combination with content that didn't hit the same, as the once happy-go-lucky vlogs would drastically turn into constant complaints and calls for sympathy, behavior that Boogie would even address himself.
Just I didn't feel like making a video, so I would make a rambling video, and I would just complain and whine and just be miserable.
And this was an early sign that all was not well for Boogie. But these issues would be exacerbated by another one of Boogie's bad habits, e-begging. It would start like so. Boogie, who was in a bad spot financially at the time, would make a video or post on Twitter explaining that he needed a little help. This would then get mixed reactions ranging from people making fun of him to people genuinely wanting to help him. It would then move to the stage where Boogie would get sudden onset amnesia and forget he was even down bad in the first place. He would then flaunt his riches, and the cycle would begin again. Most infamously, the pair of videos that would get brought up in this conversation were his "I'm finally rich" video, to then merely a year later where he uploaded the "I need your help," explaining that he had lost all of his new riches.
Called "I am finally rich, how crypto made me rich."
Oh, no.
And in the video, I didn't watch the whole thing, but I saw some clips of him saying like, I'm to the point now that I could quit YouTube, I could quit streaming, I could quit everything, and I could still live life at the same quality I have now. I could retire, and it's great. I'm glad to finally be there. He just made another video just a couple days ago, less than a year and a half after this, called "I Need Your Help." And he is talking about how his crypto investments went sideways, downward, and now he said he's lost most of the money he put into crypto. And it was like it was a very e-beggy video.
This e-begging to go along with more antics that included almost shooting someone, constant weight loss manipulation videos, and being extremely cringy on main would bury him and leave him in a place where he looked like just an old relic of an older age of YouTube, and his wholesome past seemingly forgotten along with it, showing us that trying to keep an image built on a rocky foundation is a recipe for collapse. And as he went from Francis to fell off, it's been ever so clear that the wings comparison is frighteningly close. Hey, maybe these two should box or something. And since his heyday, Boogie's been trying to recapture his former image, but to no avail. But from Boogie, who was once an incredibly popular creator, comes our final creator, who's arguably more popular than he's ever been, but also experiencing the most hate he's ever had, simultaneously. That creator is Ethan Klein. What to say about Ethan Klein that hasn't already been said? His history and recent faults have been recorded multiple times over, but what's rarely covered is why Ethan's audience has turned on him, or at least his former audience. As many of you know, Ethan prior to the H3 podcast had a second main channel, H3 Productions, where he gained the majority of his popularity. And from his original H3 channel, Ethan was able to build an incredibly strong and loyal fan base, was seen in a way like Boogie and Ian, where at one point he was like Ian, made funny satirical content, would go down as classic internet content, like his Vape Nation videos or his Ethan Bradbury videos.
Guys, I'm Mo Bradbury. I'm Ethan Bradbury.
And on top of all this, Ethan was seen as an untouchable creator, as most everyone looked at him like the way we see Charlie today. And after his copyright lawsuit case with Matt Haas, Ethan, much like Boogie, was seen as a voice of reason, and had a significant amount of weight when it came to his opinions on certain subjects. Like when PewDiePie's whole bridge situation was taking place, Ethan's comments on the whole debacle were seen as the most balanced take, when most were calling for the deletion of PewDiePie's channel. But obviously he wouldn't be in this video if something hadn't happened. And for Ethan, that thing, to most people, was the creation and content on his H3 podcast channel where he can be seen today. And while many might be thinking, how does creating a podcast make people hate you? Well, as it turns out, the creation of the H3 podcast channel subsequently meant the public execution for the main H3 channel. As uploads to that channel began to become sparse, the dominoes began falling, because this slowly alienated many of Ethan's fans, as they felt neglected by the lack of attention that the main channel was getting. And after promises and promises of coming back and setting the ship right, the channel was just never touched again. The uploads were 10 to 1 in comparison to the podcast, and eventually they ceased entirely. And as more resources and attention was getting put onto the podcast, many would start to think that the content over there would be better, in a substantial leap in terms of the production value of his old channel. But alas, his old fans felt the content on the podcast was lazy and unentertaining, as Ethan would often get information incorrect or completely misconstrued the information in general, which was embarrassing as he had the ability and resources to fact check himself but just didn't. Additionally, Ethan's skills as a podcast host, while now are significantly better, at the time of the creation of the channel just were downright awful and made for just boring content. as there would be large gaps of silence or a complete lack of cohesion with the guest who was on, leading to extremely awkward interviews, with both of the Bill Burr interviews being shining examples of this. But while many might consider this insignificant, what was more was the seemingly drastic turn Ethan's character seemed to be taking. As in comparison to the H3 videos of old with the ability to edit out large chunks of the video, we didn't get to see the full extent of Ethan's personality. We just had to make educated guesses off the content we were given. But with the nature of podcasts being one large recording, every single bit of Ethan's personality was finally on display. And to many, this new look, or potentially full look at Ethan, just seemed off. He wasn't the funny, charismatic, goofy guy we've grown to know over the years, while in spurts in the beginning of the podcast life you could see it. As it went on, he just became more bitter and judgmental. Not even in a comedic way, he just lost a lot of the luster that made him that trusted creator we all loved in the first place. But what bothered people the most, and what is becoming more and more present, was the pushing of a political agenda. Now, I'll be the first to say there's nothing inherently wrong with having political ideas be known or expressed on your platform. It's the creator's choice to do so, and while most avoid such diverse topics, in general it's not bad to do so. But if you're gonna bring up politics to the frequency that Ethan was starting to do, you have to know what you're talking about. But that was the problem. Ethan basically had no idea what he was talking about most of the time. Much like I said earlier, the habit of not doing proper research for his podcast normally was showing up big time in these more politically driven discussions. And if you're going to take the risk like this and potentially turning off a large number of your audience, you have to at least make it worth something. But for Ethan, this wasn't the case. Even when he had a full staff of people behind him, the ability to have any resource at his fingertips and literally have a show with Hassan Abi of all people, Ethan is still subpar. And Ethan is still seen as an unserious figure when it comes to politics, being more of a mindless mouthpiece than anything. And the bigger guys above him don't even look in his direction. It's just another thing to add to the list of reasons as to why so many of Ethan's old fans hate him. He just doesn't care about his channel, his fans, or his content. He'd rather do the bare minimum and skate on that than actually try, which has led to not only himself but everyone I talked about to become some of the most hated creators on this platform. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one, and peace.